Welcome to CNC Underground After Hours, the podcast for people who live somewhere between G-code, production deadlines, and explaining to apprentices why breaking a tool isn't considered testing its limits. I'm Jessica, and I'm joined today by Ben Martin, Applications Engineering Manager at Morris Midwest in Minnesota. Ben started machining at 16 as a PSEO student and has done everything from implement repairs to aerospace and medical work. Now he's helping customers leading applications and passing on the trade to the next generation. Ben's passionate about shop culture, mentorship, and making sure young machinists see a future in the trade. And don't worry, we'll mix in a few laughs along the way. Welcome, Ben. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited.
Good. Absolutely. Of course. So tell me about being a PSEO student. What was it like learning machines while still in high school?
It was a little bit intimidating at first because I'm a 16-year-old kid and everyone else there is 19, 20, going through tech school. But I immediately fell in love with what I was doing. I hadn't known anything about machining when I got into it. I had read some descriptions and it said you made, tools and things of that nature. I didn't know what that meant. And so as I started learning what the machines actually could do and what making tools meant, it wasn't making, a custom wrench or something. That was a thing that got stuck into my head, but it was making molds and dies and complicated fixtures. And I fell in love with it.
What were some of your first shop jobs?
So some of the first things that I did just because of my background as a kid were helping a family friend make custom race car parts.
Oh, very cool.
We would take parts, he'd have some idea, and the school would let me use some of the equipment during open shop time, and I'd modify parts for a Mod 4 race car.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was a great time. And then, Thursday night we'd go to the racetrack and I'd see if it worked or not.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
But then from there, the shop that I got into right away was a real small shop that a guy had kind of on the side, but he had a bunch of different CNCs. So it was CNC mill, CNC lathes, manual mills, lathes, surface grinders. And there was two of us that worked there full time, and we had to do everything, so whether it was troubleshooting a process or programming it or developing a part to fill a need, you had to learn it all pretty quickly. And so it was a great spot to start out for me, just because I like the variety. I like change, and I don't want to keep doing the same thing all the time. And so I think having my first shop be a place where I didn't go and run a lathe, I didn't go and run just a mill. It was you run the full breadth of the equipment the company has, was a really good spot to start learning and developing my skills beyond what I had learned at school.
Yeah, it helps to make you very well-rounded. That would help in the future for sure. Too many times I hear that you either know mill or lathe, so that's a very beneficial skill to be able to run both.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You've touched aerospace, defense, and medical. Which industry was the toughest?
So because of the area of defense that I did work for, that was probably the most challenging, only because we were doing quick turnaround prototypes. And so you didn't have a lot of time to go back and reinvent a process or anything, because you had 3 pieces of material and you needed, sometimes 3 of the parts, or at least two of them to be good. And you'd have 20, 30 hours into programming this part that's running as you're programming the next tool path. I think that was probably the most challenging. The aerospace stuff, that was a different type of challenge, because there it was more, getting a stable process that someone else could run, and it could run over the next number of years without much needing to be done to it, other than updating it based on process improvements because of software or tooling development.
Did you find yourself having to follow like ITAR regulations?
The defense stuff had the ITAR and some of the aerospace parts would. A lot of what we did weren't under that umbrella, but
Okay.
there definitely has been some of that.
I was talking about that in the last podcast I did, so it reminded me of our discussion on ITAR and how complicated and complex it can get.
Right.
All right, let's do something fun. This is one of my favorite segments. It's called Forgivable or Fireable. I'm going to give you a couple situations and you decide, would you forgive them or tell them to pack their bags? All right.
Okay.
First situation, someone forgot to tighten a vise before a cut.
Forgivable, but you have a conversation on best practices and why you do things in a particular way every time.
Don't do it again, right?
Right.
This is a good one. Calling in sick, but then they show up at the racetrack.
If it's the first time, we're going to have a conversation. If this has been a trend, no, you're done.
Yeah, that's more than fair. Scrapping a part, but admitting it right away.
Absolutely forgivable.
I like that they admit it right away. It's a good quality.
Absolutely.
And last one, using the wrong coolant mix.
That one's forgivable. And that's again, all of these are things where they're just good learning opportunities. Maybe you found out that the coolant was off because all of a sudden you're having a tool life issue.
Mhm.
And so it's a good opportunity to work with the individual running the machine to understand how that actually can affect quite a bit and the importance of it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thought process and how we can learn from it and use opportunities for that.
Yeah.
Let's talk shop culture. What's the difference between a shop with a good culture and one with a bad one?
I think one with a good culture, people are willing to bring up ideas and willing to be somewhat vulnerable. Hey, what if we change this process like this? Or is this something we can test on some future run to see if it would improve the process or whatever? And I think a good culture has the balance of both people willing to bring those sorts of things up, but also able to understand, just because we have an idea doesn't mean we can do it right now, but we can, put that in our list of things that we want to test as the opportunities come up.
Yeah, I talk a lot about investing in your team and how you want people to feel comfortable coming and talking about those types of things, because a lot of people have different ideas and sometimes we don't think about everything that someone else might think of, or they see it in a different light. And so that's just something that you want them to feel comfortable bringing to the table.
Absolutely. I was having a conversation with one of the engineers right before this, and I was asking him a question on the process, and I said, just so we're on the same page, this isn't a, hey, you should change the process, but my first glance, I would have done these things different, and so let's just walk through why you're doing this and the advantages. And he had some really good reasons for it and some cool ideas, and I think that's a really important thing. And if it was something where it could be, well, it might not work because of those, then we could have talked about that and the pluses and minuses of that. But you've got to be able to have those types of conversations, from either side of the fence to be able to continue to grow and develop.
Yeah, that's a good quality in a leader too. Just understanding why people think the way that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So kudos on that, because there's a lot of leaders that necessarily wouldn't. They just want it their way. So the more leaders we can get in leadership roles like that, the better off that I think our manufacturing will be.
I agree.
Yeah. Are there other things you think that make people want to stay in the shop they're working in?
Yeah, I think having shops where they care about the facilities and the equipment and all of that is important. Shops that are maintained well and clean and the machines are maintained well. I think all of that contributes to people just having a good attitude about being at work. Not like a clean machine and freshly painted walls fix everything, but it's a lot more pleasant to be in a place like that, and I think those things can go a long ways, and it just makes doing your job easier.
Yeah, and that goes along with keeping morale high and um, lowering employee turnover. The trick, I think, is balancing that with productivity, right? So, how do we keep morale high, but also remain as productive as we can be?
Right. And I think those things can pay off. And if you are staying on top of it, then it doesn't take as much to maintain. Where if you let it deteriorate and every 3 years you clean your shop, that's going to be a lot tougher. But
Mhm.
the shops that have a schedule and everybody is used to just maintaining it at a higher level, it doesn't impact your time much at all after a while.
How do you think that affects apprentices?
I think for them, I mean, one, it's a great asset for helping get that done, but also as they're doing it, having somebody come alongside a machinist doing, some cleaning on a machine, or a service tech doing a PM, or, fixing some piece of equipment, they can more quickly understand, oh, this job was easier because the machine was clean and the area around it was, or
Yeah.
this job was really difficult because it hadn't been cleaned and we had to, shovel a pile of chips that had fallen on the floor behind the coolant tank before we could pull it out of the way. It gives them a appreciation for those efforts.
I don't have experience in seeing apprentices in the shop, but is that kind of where they start out in the things that they do in a lot of situations and then work their way up, or how does that work?
I think it varies in each situation. The guys who have worked directly for or with me typically were on track to become a programmer or manufacturing engineer. And, for some of that, we were doing the machine maintenance and those sorts of things. For that role, it gave you a better understanding when you were doing some programming. Maybe you understood better why running your facing toolpath a certain direction caused less issues for the machinist at the machine because you had just helped fix the door jamming issue,
Yeah.
or you had just helped, get the broken tool reset back up that had blown off because you hadn't turned on the correct coolant setting for it, or, whatever. I think all of understanding more of all of that process helps them become much better.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were talking about, where learning all of it just is more beneficial and helps create the well-rounded individuals and employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that can help with culture and continuing to learn is looking for opportunities outside of that shop where you can gain some more knowledge. And it doesn't have to necessarily be some event specifically tied to something you need to know right then, but going to the GibbsCAM events and talking with other manufacturers and seeing some other tool pads, you might get some idea that stimulates something 6 months down the road for solving a problem that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, because you're in, kind of your isolated environment, where going to those training events by cutting tool vendors or work holding vendors can really be beneficial long term.
Yeah, I love that. And continuing your education in any environment is beneficial, but maybe people aren't thinking about it as much in the programming and machining world. But
Mhm.
networking, continuing the education, even if it doesn't necessarily apply to your day to day at that moment, yeah, that could very well help you out in the future.
Absolutely.
I love that. So you started at 16. What made you stay in this realm of work?
Well, that the first day I walked into the school, I couldn't figure out. I looked at a Bridgeport, which looked like a big piece of metal with levers and knobs and things all over. I couldn't figure out what it actually did. And, as we started learning the equipment and got to start understanding how to use the tools and starting to make stuff on it, like I had said earlier, I fell in love with it. And I enjoy making things. I enjoy the manufacturing process, whether I'm at a machine setting up and running a part, or whether I'm programming it or just coming up with an idea for a process. I enjoy all those different aspects about manufacturing. And I've thought before if there was something I would rather do than this, and I couldn't come up with anything I'd rather do than something involving making parts.
I don't think that machinists and programmers and really anybody involved in manufacturing gets enough credit for the creativity, the problem solving, the critical thinking that it takes. Before I got into the manufacturing world, I had no idea. I think
Yeah.
trade school has a stigma around it, the trades in general. And now that I know so much about it, it's completely unfair stereotype that surrounds it, because machinists and programmers and it's some of the smartest people I've ever met. Just
Yeah.
the ability
And
of
there's
the
so many different areas of it. I've been doing it for over 20 years now, and the opportunities to expand your knowledge into a different area are just endless. And for kids thinking about what they want to do, manufacturing can have a lot of different looks to it. You could get into developing automation cells and doing robot programming, or fixture design and things like that, or programming, or doing heavy equipment repair type parts where you're getting in a large steel part and it's an emergency job every time, and you've got to come up with some way to get that piece of equipment up and going. But there's just so many different aspects to it that I can never get bored, because I can just find a new avenue of a different portion of manufacturing to keep learning in.
What do you think kids are missing? Maybe it's in the educational world, but when they hear machining, and when I was in school too, I didn't necessarily know what they were talking about, but I didn't know that it is what it is. So what do you think is missing, or what could we do better to change that?
I think a lot of them just don't understand what it actually entails. When I started, like I had said, when I got to this school, I thought it was one thing. It kind of is, but but it was really totally different than what I expected, and much better. And I've talked to a lot of younger kids who they understand some type of manufacturing, but it might be like, more on the welding and fabrication side,
Mhm.
or, molded parts, but they don't understand all of the different areas of it. And so I think showing them what the programming might look like for how to create a part, and, taking a block of steel, loading it in the mill, and coming out with that part at the end, or loading a bar of titanium into a lathe and making that fitting.
Mhm.
And them getting to just see what that process looks like. I mean, I have seen 12, 13-year-old kids get to watch something like that the first time, and all of a sudden their eyes light up because
Yeah,
they'd never even imagined anything like that. And
right.
it's not necessarily going to be for everybody, but I think there's a lot of kids who just don't get the opportunity to explore it because they don't know about it at all, or don't have a good understanding of what that can entail.
Yeah, I think schools are doing a better job of showing additive manufacturing, like 3D printing.
Mhm.
I think a lot more schools are adapting that now. So hopefully that helps to increase interest from
Yeah.
the younger generation, but there are also still so much to offer from programming in general.
Yeah. And I know groups like the MPMA are working really hard at getting manufacturing in front of kids. They've got things going on at the state fair that
Yeah.
highlighting manufacturing. We're working on getting a student day set up in our showroom facility, so we can bring kids in, whether they're in high school or tech school, or even middle school, coming in and getting to see Swiss machines running, or mills, or mill turns, or 5-axis machines running, and get to ask questions of the different engineers, or tooling or software representatives. And so I think if each company tries to find ways that they can be involved somehow, it doesn't have to be something huge, but just be willing to give a handful of kids a tour of your shop even can be a huge impact on somebody's life.
Absolutely. Even I have a 6-year-old son, and granted, he'll change what he wants to do 100 times. But
Mhm.
right now, because of what I do, he's been exposed to some programming, some engineering, and seeing, the cool things that machines do. And he's totally into it. He's like,
Yeah.
I got to learn how to do that. That is so cool.
Yeah,
So it really can. And, there's no saying what he'll do in the future, but at least he's had the opportunity to be exposed to that.
absolutely. one of my kids was having a great time one day, just sitting there with a microscope and putting different metal chips underneath it, looking at them and how the edges look. They'd ask questions, and I've never thought of why the edge of a drill chip looks like that, or why the edge of a chip off an end mill looks exactly like that. But let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, and we need someone to think about that. So
Right. Somebody's got to work at Sandvik or ISCAR or whoever.
right, for sure. I love that. That's such a cool way to think about it. I wouldn't have thought of it either. Let's play Machinist Myths Ben Edition. I'm going to give you a statement and you tell me if it's a myth or it's busted. Machining is just pushing buttons.
That is a myth. It is way more than that.
Good. I think so too. Apprentices don't need training. They'll just figure it out.
The success rate with the letting them flounder and just figure it out has turned out to be a lot lower than if we give them some training.
I think you're probably right. That made me think of something. You know how like people train or like do swim lessons now where they say just like to throw the kid in and they figure it out? Absolutely terrifying. I would never be able to do that. It just reminded me of that. I think that's a terrible way. I mean, maybe it works for some people, but not what I'm thinking about. So
right.
One way to think of it, I guess. You can't make any money in machining.
No, I think you can do quite well for yourself. And that really comes down to what you want to do. And I think it's probably true for a lot of different trades. But if you're driven and you want to learn more, I think you can do quite well. I've been very pleased with being able to provide for my family over the years in this trade. And even if you don't want to move up to a higher level position, but you just become a better operator, a better machinist, a better setup guy, a better programmer, and you might have one area that you really want to focus in, but just work on growing your skills and getting the best you can at that role. And I think you will do very well.
There's a high demand for it too, especially at what I've been seeing is an increased demand for MTM, lathe, Swiss machinists and programmers. And so, yeah, if you can dial in on something, like that's going to be around and the demand is high.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. One more. Shop work is boring and repetitive.
Well, I wouldn't run production. And that comes down to finding your spot, finding the things that drive you. I know guys who absolutely love running high volume production, and they love all the intricacies of tracking the trend of their 3 offsets that they're really focused on and how they're doing and maximizing tool life over 1 million parts and all of that. And for me, I would do a really bad job because I'd all of a sudden start watching over there and thinking about something else. And
Squirrel.
Yep, absolutely. So for me, I never found a love for running production, but on the programming and engineering side, coming up with that process that we could get out there into the machine and get that up and running. Yeah, that I find hugely rewarding, being able to do that. So it really depends on what you want to do. You're going to have times when you're like, whatever. You're just programming a bunch of basic parts, and cool, that's not that exciting. But yeah. I think there are a lot of things that can keep this role from being boring.
Yeah, and I think that there really is different types of people. Some people like doing the same thing over and over again, like you said, and that could apply to any job. There's lots of jobs that you do the same thing day in and day out. And some people like it that way. I am not one. I am in agreement with you. I need variety, and constantly doing 100 things at one time is how I am the most productive.
Yeah. And I've talked to a friend, and he asked me what my weeks look like and what I do each day. And it sounded horrible to him to not know what you were going to do the next day, because it can radically change.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, I love it.
Yeah. I have a list that I hope to get done every day, but you never know.
Right.
You never know. Let's talk more about your applications work, leadership. What's the biggest challenge customers bring to you?
I think more and more the projects that are getting brought up have some kind of automation to it. They're trying to get more done. So how can they select a machine that's going to give them more unattended runtime or simplify the process? Because they still have those people there at the shop running equipment, but they need more capacity and can't find somebody to run it. So how can we maximize that? And, each project kind of has its own things to think about and how you can automate it. I mean, automation can be as simple as having a macro that creates your tool assembly for you and ties it to a tool path, or it could be a bar feeder on a lathe, or it could be a elaborate robot system, loading a machine, running it through inspection, cleaning the part, putting it in its packaging at the end. But I think those are more and more becoming the focus and can really be kind of exciting to work on.
Yeah, I hear it a lot too. More people are bringing up AI all the time. AI as well as automation, robotics. And I think a lot of the time, especially when people are getting started, they think robotics right away and robot arms. And I don't think enough people know about macros and how those can help you and all of the other AutoCAM products that are coming out that help you program simple parts, and then really take your employees and have them do the work that they need to focus on that we don't want the robots and the AI to do right now, and just reevaluate how your system is in place and who can do what to better maximize efficiency, right? Everybody does just want faster, they want it easier, and that doesn't necessarily mean a robot arm. So just getting the word out about all the different ways that we can automate that people are unaware of right now will be more beneficial to everyone in the long run.
Right. Yeah. A few years ago, some other programmers and engineers and I started exploring ways we could make our process or make our programs and documentation more robust. Most of us were of a similar personality to mine, where we didn't really enjoy doing something that we felt was mindless. So typing all of the information into a setup sheet seemed really unfulfilling.
Yeah.
But it's a really helpful thing for the machinist to have, and it's even more helpful if it's formatted the same every time. And, so our focus for automation for a long time wasn't on any of the typical things people think of, but it was, all right, how can we automatically, out of CAM, populate the setup sheet with as much information as we can, so that way any programmer, any engineer could create the documentation. It's going to look the same to every machinist or operator, and we're adding a few notes, but we're not typing in the tool holder number or the stick out or which end mill to pick. It would take care of all that automatically. And so we just started thinking of all the things that we basically hated doing the most and trying to simplify it or eliminate it.
Yeah, that's the way we have to think about it, and how we can use automation to our advantage while also then using humans to our advantage, right?
Yeah, because then those guys were free to do the things that were rewarding and were fun. It's a lot more fun to figure out how hard you can push that end mill in the cut than it was to figure out how to get Excel formatted just so.
Yeah, and a lot more efficient, and you can get a lot more done that way too.
Right.
What is one of the coolest projects that you've been a part of?
So I think, I've gotten to work on a lot of different cool projects. One of the shops that I worked at, we did a bunch of parts for the Mars Rover. And that was a pretty exciting thing to get to have machined parts for. I had one where I'd done the projects years ago, but I was in this shop and getting to see a cell that I had done the initial setup on a dozen years before, and see that machine and the robot and everything still running. I'd gone there to answer a few questions, and there's a younger manufacturing engineer that was explaining how the system worked and what all you needed to do and what all it was capable of. And his boss turned to him and goes, "This is the guy that built it." I mean, oh, okay. But it was fun because when you're working in a shop, you kind of can see over time how that goes and what improvements are needed. But in the applications engineering job, you don't always see down the road how everything worked out. And that was one of those where it was a bunch of effort up front. It was a pretty neat project, but then just getting to see it 10, 12 years later, still running without having to have a major revamp to actually make it perform for a number of years. But the core thing was still there, still functioning. That was pretty cool.
That's really cool. That's definitely something to be proud of. All right, let's play Would You Rather Apprentice Edition.
All right.
All right. Would you rather teach an apprentice who asks 1,000 questions or one who refuses to ask any?
I'm going with 1,000 questions.
I mean, it's a good quality, right? They want to be sure. I would agree with you, though. One who doesn't ask any questions could be troublesome.
And if they're asking too many or the same one over and over, you can just remind them of that. And you don't have to tell them the answer again. One of our engineers, if somebody comes and asks the same question a handful of times, he'll hand them a notebook and pen.
I mean, that's efficient. So would you rather crash a tool in front of a full class or lose power mid-demo?
I'm going with the lose power.
It's not your fault. So
right. We'll let the act of God take care of that one.
Yeah, I hear you. Would you rather run the night shift again or sit through a full day vendor PowerPoint?
Ooh, those both sound somewhat painful. We'll go the vendor PowerPoints. I might learn something new.
Yeah, I'm not a night shift kind of person. I couldn't make it.
No.
Would you rather clean coolant tanks every Friday or explain offsets to someone new every Monday?
I currently do a lot closer to the offsets to someone new every Monday. So I'm going to go with that one. Giving somebody a new skill is fun.
There you go. Yeah, they didn't say it was the same person, right? It's not the 1,000 question guy.
Right.
That's
You're
so
in a new shop.
Okay, since you're an AE, let's play Pick Your Machine. I'm going to test your knowledge a little. I'll throw out a part type and you tell us which machine that you'd use. No dodging, you have to pick one.
All right.
All right. Titanium aerospace brackets.
Titanium aerospace brackets. I'm probably going to go to, I don't know what kind of brackets. I might need a 5-axis. So we're going to go with a 5-axis.
All right. Small run medical implant prototype.
Sounds like a good machine for a SS38 from Sagami.
That's what came to my mind too. Those Sagami.
Yep. 5-axis head and the ability to still run a Swiss style process.
Mm-hmm. Big chunky egg equipment part.
We're gonna go with a Akuma double column.
Okay. High volume aluminum manifold.
We don't know how big, so I would say a horizontal.
Definitely.
Yep.
Custom tool holder with tight tolerances.
Well, I would do the initial machining on a mill turn, like a Akuma Multis, and the finishing post heat treat on a grinder.
Oh, good combination.
Mm-hmm.
A random part someone drew in crayon on a napkin.
Probably going to need an MU 4000 5-axis. I think we're going to need mate work holding on there and Matrix magazine with high pressure coolant.
I love it. That's fantastic. Oh, thanks for playing that one with me. What excites you the most about where machining is headed?
I think, seeing some of the advancements in the CAM automation, currently that's been something that I've been trying to learn more and more about, and just seeing how quickly that's advancing is extremely exciting. I remember a few years back talking with one of the tooling companies and how there's always been kind of a kind of a race between, and the tooling would improve, but the machine couldn't keep up, or the software couldn't keep up, and they each keep pushing each other further and further. And so just seeing some of how quickly that's advancing is making me excited, because I'm not sure what else that might drive and what else that could affect. But just knowing that, that's going to free some buffer space up for some of the guys doing programming, where they're going to start exploring some other ideas and other things. And we're just going to keep seeing development across the industry because of that.
Yeah, I love that. What advice would you give to a 16-year-old starting like you did?
I think having a willing attitude, don't get in your head that I'm a mill guy, I'm not going to learn that machine. But also don't try and know it all. Be willing to take a more experienced guy's advice. I was talking to one of my boys a while back, and he had explained how he knew something right away, as kids sometimes do. But we were just talking about the importance of being willing to listen to someone else, because you might know a lot of what they're going to say, but there might be little bits in there that you can learn. And just have that attitude of willingness to try different things, and willingness to basically admit you don't know everything about a topic or an area of it. I think is really, really important. There's some grumpy machinists out there, I've heard, and if you know it right away and don't listen to them, they might not give you a second opportunity to learn from them. But where if you show you're willing to listen and willing to learn, they're going to be a lot more willing to help you out.
Yeah, especially with the wealth of tribal knowledge that is on the line. It's really something
Absolutely.
we need to take in with all the retirements and the next generations coming up. Just listening, even if you don't agree with it, listen.
Yeah.
It'll help you in the future. Like we were talking about before, a situation might come up in 6 months and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I had that conversation.
Absolutely. I was working with a tool maker, and I'd have lots of questions because I was a 19-year-old kid trying to figure out things. And he said, tell you what, I don't know how to run CNCs. I might have some questions on it, and you answer the questions I have, that I'm, whether I'm curious about it or if he was actually trying to run one. But you don't make fun of me, give me a hard time about it, and I'll answer whatever questions you have on a cutting tool or a material or a fixer that you might have. And just him being willing to take that opportunity to be somewhat vulnerable and go, hey, I really don't want to feel dumb, and please don't. But then being willing to give me his wisdom from 50 years of machining prior was invaluable.
Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. So ask questions, because you never know what you're going to find out.
Absolutely.
Well, Ben, this was so fun. I'm so glad that you could join me. Where can people connect with you if they want to follow?
So I'm on LinkedIn as Benjamin Martin. That'd be the main spot to find me at.
That works.
If you want to reach out via email, you can send me an email at bmartin@morrismidwest.com.
Great. Well, that's it for today's episode of CNC Underground After Hours. Until next time, keep the coolant clean, the deadlines close, and remind your apprentices that snapping a tool is not the same thing as R&D.